Welcome to the Designing Hollywood podcast in association with The John Campea Show. I'm your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. This episode is sponsored by the Costume Rentals Corporation. The Designing Hollywood Show is dedicated to all things movies, the movie industry, and its talented professionals. Today's guest is a groundbreaking Indian costume designer who has built a long and illustrious career working with some of cinema's most prominent filmmakers. He designs both in Hindi cinema as well as Hollywood. He was born in India and studied film at New York University's Tisch School of the Arts. Today, Arjun shuttles effortlessly between Hollywood and Bollywood, crisscrossing sensibilities and ideologies. After studying at New York University Film School, he started working with Hollywood films for a while before returning to India, where he started his career as a costume designer with, and forgive me if I get this wrong, Dil Chahata Hai? Creating and designing unique worlds, characters, and adventures through costume. His recent film and television work includes Miss Marvel, After Yang, A Suitable Boy, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, Gully Boy, Can You Ever Forgive Me, where, oh man, you work with Richard E. Grant, one of my favorites, The Happytime Murders, HBO's Divorce, Seasons 1, 2, and 3, Three Generations, Love is Strange, Begin Again, The Amazing Life of Pi, and The Reluctant Fundamentalist. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to welcome costume designer Arjun Bhasin, the Designing Hollywood podcast.
Thank you so much, and it's good to meet you too. I had no idea I'd worked on all those things, so thank you for that. I suddenly feel like I've been around too long, and I should throw my hat in.
I disagree. I think you haven't been around enough. You have much more work to do. You know, I was fascinated by recently the Tollywood film RRR has been burning up the charts, burning up the Netflix charts, making money all over the world. And suddenly I've heard a lot of talk about Indian cinema. And for me, I've always thought that was strange that we in America don't know much about it because it's really the biggest film industry in the world. And, you know, watching like the Apu trilogy in film school, Indian cinema was something that I was aware of for a long time. And we get very few Indian films released. I remember seeing Lagan, which was a movie about, you know, cricket that Columbia Pictures released here, which I loved. And then, of course, there's crazy science fiction movies like Robot. But I'm so fascinated that you sort of work between these two worlds. How did you find yourself? Well, first of all, when you were growing up, were you a film fan?
Oh yeah, very much so. I'm from a family of film fans. We all went to the cinema as part of our, you know, it was our family outing. So always films, a lot of English language films, a lot of Hindi language films, and I always wanted to find my way into motion pictures. So when I finished high school in India, I decided that I was going to study film, and I came to NYU to study film, and then ended up, you know, as one does, PAing and assisting designers and working, you know, back and forth between the US and India, and sort of found my own place in both, and being able to tell stories of one place and, you know, moving them to another and moving ideas, and it's been an exciting journey for me.
Now, did you know that what areas of filmmaking that you wanted to get into when you went to film school?
Not really. I knew I wanted to be involved in film, and when I went to film school at NYU, they make you do sort of a internship program where they make you work for different, you know, go to film companies and sign up, and one of my first jobs was with a costume designer in the costume department, and it just seemed like the perfect fit for me. It's what I understood. I always loved clothes, and I always loved fashion, and I always wanted to be a storyteller, and it seemed like the right thing, and it just all happened by accident, I think, like most careers in the world.
Now, how did you find yourself? So when you went to film school here in America and you started interning and things like that, were you how did you find yourself then back in India and sort of back and forth? Was your career always jumping between countries?
No, it's one of those things when you arrive in the US as a student, you're still so connected with your home country, and especially for immigrants, it's very much a part of our growing up, is to go back home for events and things, and then when I started working, it just seemed like the natural way for me to develop my skills, to work part-time here and part-time there, and not having to choose between two places was really a blessing, being able to do both things, and I've made a career out of being in both countries, and I think it's given me a very specific outlook on life and on design.
Well, I mean, it's incredible that you were able to do that, and what a unique gift you have doing that. And I'm curious, a lot of the designers I've talked to speak about sort of a rigorous academic background when it comes to things like costume design, where you study fine art, you study the artwork in the great museums, and then the actual technical aspects of making clothes. Was that something you found yourself focusing on?
I wish I had, in a way. Now I studied film more, and more of my work comes from an understanding of cinema and of storytelling. I don't feel like I'm really connected to fashion in a way. I don't feel like I'm connected to clothing in that way. I'm not classically trained as a costume designer. I'm really a filmmaker. All my friends are filmmakers, and everything that I think about is, when I'm working, is about how to tell a story and how to make the costumes work towards a story, as opposed to it being like a fashion moment. So I think everyone's journey is particular and specific, and that was mine.
Well, I find it fascinating that, like a lot of great designers, you've worked with directors over and over again. And I was a big fan of Mira Nair. I remember seeing, I think it was Salam Bombay in the late 80s, and I was really taken by that film. I thought it was terrific, and I was in college when I saw it. And again, it was so great to get a new and interesting voice. How did you meet with her, and how did the two of you start working together?
Thank you for asking that about Mira, because she and I have done 5 projects together.
Yeah.
And actually, I started as an intern and an assistant on a film that she directed called Kama Sutra in India. And lovely Ed Castro was the costume designer, and I worked with him. And then we just developed a shorthand, Mira and I. And when she did Monsoon Wedding, she asked me to go back to India. I was living in New York to design it. I was in my early 20s.
Wow.
And she said, I'm doing this little movie. It's called Monsoon Wedding. We have a tiny little budget, and I just want it to be like a family run movie with, just easy little thing. We'll just shoot it in 22 days, and it's going to be and I went back to India to do this movie, and of course it turned into a massive hit. And
Yeah.
25 years later, I'm still working on Monsoon Wedding. They're now adapting it for stage, for Broadway, and I'm designing it. So, and then she and I did The Namesake together, and then we did Reluctant Fundamentalist together, and just recently we did a big BBC series, Suitable Boy, together, which is a period 1950s show, and we've just been connected. I understand her sensibility. She understands mine, and we have an interesting design shorthand, and we work together a lot.
Well, the relationship that a director has with a costume designer, and then the relationship that the actors have with a costume designer. I think I've often said on this show that it's one of the most important hires on a show, because a costume designer has to make sure that the actors look great, and the last thing an actor wants to do is worry if they look good or not when they get in front of the camera. So developing relationships with your actors, and you've worked with people like Melissa McCarthy multiple times, and working with Mira Nair over and over again. How do you develop that rapport? Do you develop a shorthand when you're talking to the director? And how does that sort of develop between the two of you?
The actor thing is very interesting because often, often the actor comes into costume fitting is their first real interaction with the film. It's before they meet the DP. It's before they've really had time to spend with the director or with the other actors. It's really their first kind of moment where they're finding their characters and is in a costume fitting. And I've had actors come into costume fittings and be shocked at what story I'm trying to tell, and then it then introduces them to a whole new set of questions, and they're like, oh, this is the person I'm playing, and then they bring something to it that I'm like, oh, I never thought about that. So the kind of the rapport is so important to me, this idea of, and it really encapsulates what cinema is all about. It's the different departments coming together to tell the story that the director wants to tell. So the actor costume designer kind of coming together moment is, I think, is huge for the film and what the film is doing. I often will hold back ideas till the actor walks into the room because I'm concerned about how they want to play it, what they want to say, what story we're trying to tell. Is everyone saying the same thing? And it can be a make or break experience, that first costume fitting. And very much the same thing with the director. I think when you work with the director, the point of the way I see, what I do is, it's very much about visually being able to tell a story. What am I putting forward? Is it greed? Is it anger? Is it joy? What do I want people to feel when they see an actor in a costume? It's less about how they look and more about what I want the audience to react to. What is the reaction that I'm trying to get? And I think actors love that when you put them in a position where you say, here's a shirt, or here's a pair of trousers, or here's a dress. It doesn't mean anything. They wear lots of clothes, but when you try to make it feel, when the idea is, you wear this and it says this to the audience. It says this to the other people in the scene. It says this to the people who, I think those are special moments when you can find those things that trigger the audience reaction. Because we don't make films for us. We make films for people to watch.
Sure.
And it's all about what that is going to say.
Well, that said, where does the process, as a filmmaker and somebody who went to film school, where does the process begin with you? Does it begin when you've read the script, or is it with the characters themselves, or the overall story you're trying to tell? Like when you first get a script and you start reading about the characters, are you suddenly envisioning what they would look like and what you want to dress them in? How does that process begin for you?
I think it's the same for anybody. When you read a book or anything, you sort of have a picture in your mind of what you think it could be, and you play to that, and then you introduce all these new characters. The production designer comes in with kind of like their vision and their visual board, which is in their mind, and the DP has the same thing, and the director has something, and you all sit together and think, this is what we're all thinking. What do we want the audience to think? Are we all saying the same thing? Are we telling the same story? Or are we telling a fractured kind of different story? And I think when a film really works it's when all the departments have understood the story they're trying to tell and why it's important, or or why it should, what it wants to what it wants to say to people.
Well, to that end, like you just mentioned, the production design and the director of photography, do you start interacting with them early in the process to understand that each of their palettes, like in terms of the colors that the set designers and the production designer might use, and then also the director of photography might have an overall philosophy of the look of the film? And do you tailor your work to what they've done, or do you sort of help them define what you want them to do?
I mean, I'd like to hope that it's both things, that it's a give and take situation. Sometimes it's one more than the other. Very often it's everyone together, and I don't think there's the moment when that begins and ends. I think it's an ongoing thing. It's a constant give and take. It's a constant back and forth of what the story is and what the vision is. And I think very often it's not just the vision of one person. It's not just the director's vision. It's many people's visions that make a movie. It's the actor's vision.
Sure.
Where does the actor come in? There's hair and makeup. There's so many different people who have so much to say about what, and everyone wants to bring their artistry to the forefront without having it cloud the overall, sensibility of the movie. So it starts with on the page. I mean, immediately when I read something, I have an idea of what my take is going to be and then it's ongoing. So the more you work with people, directors, for instance, the more you work with the director, the more you kind of understand what their headspace is, what their method of working is, and the easier it becomes.
You worked with Marielle Heller on both Can You Ever Forgive Me and It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. And I have to say, I loved Can You Ever Forgive Me, but I was really taken by the costumes. Melissa McCarthy's character and Richard E. Grant were kind of these living on the fringes, desperate people. And I really loved the way that you conveyed their characters through how they were dressed. When I saw the film the first time, it really stuck out because it perfectly encapsulated those characters. And I'm just a fan of both of those actors, especially Richard E. Grant, who I've loved for years since With Nail and I. What was that like working with Marielle? And do you guys, because you did the same thing with A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, the clothes were just, I don't know, I call them sumptuous. Do the two of you have a special relationship where there's just something about those particular films that, to me, the costumes really stood out to me as really creating character. Like you knew exactly who those people were as soon as they walked into the frame. And that's not an easy thing to do without it wasn't ostentatious. It felt so naturalistic. And I'm like, that is great.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that. When I went to see Marielle for the first time, when we started talking about Can You Ever Forgive Me, I had moved to New York in the early 90s. And I very much remember New York as being this, this post 80s, like haves and have nots kind of world.
Right.
And I was definitely in the have nots side of New York in the early 90s. And so were these two characters. And I feel like it was so much about the time in New York that I first went to New York. And I feel like I saw those people. I didn't really know them, but I feel like I saw those characters, at the corner of my eye at bars and restaurants. And you could tell that like the 80s and the 90s had kind of passed them by. And they had been like left in the corner of wherever they were. And we wanted that idea. And we talked about that a lot. It's a literary film. It's about literary people, and we wanted the film to feel very much like a dusty old bookstore or a dusty old library. And I kept showing her images of dusty libraries and saying, "This is what I want Melissa's clothes to look like," and everyone. But I wanted this idea of these quirky, weird characters that inhabit New York City, that live in New York City, and we see them all the time, and we kind of, we kind of steer away from them because we worry about what those people are going to say to us or do. But they're big, flamboyant characters who have been contenders but didn't actually make it, and got left behind by the speed of New York City. And I love the script for that. I love the idea of who these people were and how sad and messy they were, but also how beautiful and special and honest they were to their craft. I mean, and that was what we wanted to say very much, that these people were trying to get by in a world that had forgotten them. And that was the idea for the design, really.
Well, when you teamed up again and you made A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, if that was, of course, I mean, you had Tom Hanks playing Mr. Rogers, who was such an iconic figure and who was really also known because he would come in and literally put on a sweater. Like part of his act, his whole character was when he did his show. Again, you did kind of the same thing. There was a feeling that you were able to create immediately through the clothes in that film, and it just struck me. I thought you did such a great job with that one as well, and the two of you clearly are on the same page. She must really trust you and allow you to do that, because whatever you did in those films for her, it leapt off the screen. I thought, and it was amazing. Was that a shorthand the two of you developed in terms of director and costume designer?
I had a much harder time with Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. I feel like the story of that film is really about nostalgia, and it's about how we react to nostalgia as people, and how we knew that the audience was going to come to the movie already knowing everything that there was to know about that. I had never seen or heard of Mr. Rogers when I got the script.
Well, you grew up in India, there's.
I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what it was about. And I would say to people, I'm doing this movie about Mr. Rogers. And their eyes would just light up. Everybody who I would say, they would be like, oh, Mr. Rogers. And I thought, oh, shit, I'm like, I need to pull up my socks and figure out what this really is about. And so I tried to speak to a lot of people who he meant so much to, who was so important to, and try to get the essence of what it was that really connected to them, and why it connected to them. And so we drew on a lot of design elements that we thought would create this nostalgia and would speak to that nostalgia. And the more I read about him and learned about him and saw in the shows, I mean, Mr. Rogers himself did that. He used these solid blocks of primary colors because he wanted to draw children into seeing his show.
Sure. Yeah.
It was all very organized in a way. Like the simplicity of it was created for a reason. And we wanted to do the same thing. And speaking with Mr. Hanks as well, he had this idea that he wanted it to be kind and truthful and honest to what the show was about, and we used all of those things, played on those elements to make that film work.
Oh, well, you did a fantastic job. I mean, I think anyone who grew up with Mr. Rogers, that movie was sort of irresistible. Fantastic job. But another thing that you'd worked on that I really feel is sort of criminally. I wouldn't say it's not seen, but people don't know it. And it's a fairly recent movie, a science fiction film that I thought was a beautiful movie, which was After Yang. And After Yang, for those who don't know, it takes place in a future society where families can have their own AIs that are in the guise of a human being, a person, and Colin Farrell's in it. And I love this film. And it's this quiet, beautiful, sort of melancholy science fiction film, and yet it's so full of emotion. And I wonder if there's anything you can tell us about that movie, because I keep asking people, have you guys seen After Yang? And people tell me no. What is that? And I'm like, but you would love that movie. And so many of our viewers love science fiction, fantasy, and horror, and it's just a beautiful, quiet science fiction film. And how was your experience working on After Yang?
I love that movie so much. I loved it from the moment that I read page one of the script. It was one of those little movies that sort of, was not on my radar till a friend of mine who was who was producing it, sent it to me and said, "You should read the script, and you should check out the director's previous film, Columbus," which I remember seeing, but and loving. But I went back to it to kind of understand the director and his, what his kind of space was. And then I read the script again. It was a tiny little movie. We shot it in New York for, a low budget, and we didn't know. I didn't think I knew that Colin Farrell was attached to it when I read it, but it seemed like one of those beautiful meditations that wasn't really a narrative. It was just like an idea, and
Yeah.
it could have been anything. It really could have been set anywhere or anything, and it was about loss and parenting and love and like big umbrella issues, but in like a tiny little story that it's so gentle and pure. Um, and it was one of those moments where, when I met Koganada, the director, for the first time, I was in India on holiday, and we had a Zoom meeting, and I just sent him like all these images, which were like, you know, from Japan and Asia, and like I sent him a little poem, and I sent him a picture of a rock, and and I was like, "This is what I think the movie is about," and he immediately responded. He was like, "You're absolutely right. This is what the movie is about," and we just made the film. We just made the film on that. It's a film about longing and loss, and I'm always drawn to these sort of immigrant stories because I feel like I'm able to speak to them, and this really felt like it was a film about that without being specifically about that. It's really about moving home and losing something and gaining something, and understanding that what you have is important, and what you've lost is just as important. And there were these big, beautiful themes that I wanted very much to be a part of that film.
It's just a wonderful movie, and I hope maybe as a result of this, more people will watch it, because I thought it was just terrific, and it's really affecting.
I think it came out it was released also at an awkward time when people weren't going to the cinema because of the pandemic, etc. But it is a beautiful, beautiful film, and something that I'm very proud of. Regardless, I love it.
Well, it brings up an idea. I mean, I'm curious, being that you're going back and forth between the Indian film industry and here in America, is your work the same, or are there significant differences between what it's like to work in the Bollywood industry or what it's like to work in Hollywood?
I think my work is similar, but I think that the audiences are very different for both sets of films. And I think one has to take into account what people are paying money to go see, and what they want to see, and what you want to bring to them. And I think that if you have your filmmaker hat on, you try to bring that out, and I think a lot of new filmmakers and the people who I work with in India are very much about character, and they want this idea of like, a character development story. But there's also people who are going to the cinema, who are going to the cinema for the joy of it, who want to have a joyous cinematic experience, and you have to balance those two things out. With And I think it's maybe similar here as well, but it's a different mindset about the people who are going to cinema, and something that should be taken into account.
Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, audiences, it seems like they are very different, and Indian films are very different. I mean, at any moment, someone's going to break into song and a lavish dance. Hundreds of people are studying.
There's a lot of song and dance. The films shoot for much longer periods of time because they have 5 or 6 dance numbers in them, usually with a few hundred dancers who need to be clothed, and they love the spectacle of traveling to different countries and shooting a one song number over 12 locations over 15 days, and it's there's a lot of that. But um but it, it's it's interesting. I mean, I think that you mentioned Satyajit Ray, and I always think of Satyajit Ray, for instance, not as like a real Bollywood filmmaker, but as an international filmmaker working in India.
Yeah, I mean,
The way his films are structured,
yeah, he was making neo-realist movies in India, like when they were
Exactly.
doing like Open City in Rome, and because it was very funny when I saw the Apu trilogy for the first. I actually own the Apu trilogy. I've watched it so many times, and then when I started watching more modern Indian cinema, I'm like, well, wait a minute, this isn't this isn't what I was expecting. It was very different, but I liked it. I mean, there's the Indian cinema is crazy. You got some crazy science fiction films and crazy horror movies, and even in those movies, giant musical numbers will break out. And there's always romance, and it's just a whole different.
It's similar to the Hollywood system. If people say like this is what American cinema is, I mean, you can't really. There's no one particular genre,
Right.
of American film. There's different genres, and different directors have different stories to tell, and there's different genres. So I think I think I would love for more people to see more films from around the world, because I feel like there isn't like a specific like Indian cinema or a
Right.
specific American cinema. I think
Well,
you got the gamut.
something like RRR, I hadn't heard anybody talk about an Indian movie like that in a long time. And now people are like, hey, man, have you seen RRR yet? And I think it's great to hear. And I think that's going to happen more and more with streaming services like Netflix that bring on, obviously, Disney Star made a deal to show more cricket in India. And there's going to be a lot of more crossover between the streamers because there has been a lot more international work brought to especially American audiences through Netflix. And I think slowly, because there was really, unless you were looking for Indian cinema, there wasn't a lot of places in America where people that were unaware of it could stumble across it, whereas on Netflix they can. So hopefully one of the great byproducts of the streaming era is that we're going to see a lot more films from different countries. And there's a lot of Indian movies that I think could benefit from getting on. Even older movies from the 70s and 80s hopefully will show up, and more American audiences or Western audiences will discover these films. Is the workflow the same in India as it is in America in terms of what you do, in terms of costume design and manufacturing, and how the projects evolve?
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. It's there are differences, with the way the things work. I mean, like I said, Indian films, whenever I've worked on Indian films, they're much longer in duration to shoot, and so it's a much more of a commitment. But again, more and more with smaller films and streaming films, and people are making films quicker and faster. I mean, the old studio system of film in India would take a long time to film, just because people were working on multiple things simultaneously, and everything had to be built from scratch. There are no big costume shops where you could go and rent things, and everything has to be manufactured specifically for the film. So in that way, it is different. Um, but but films are films, I mean, it's all the same stuff.
Well, it seems like they found the perfect designer for Miss Marvel. When Marvel decided to make the Miss Marvel series, I after speaking with you, I can't imagine that there was any other costume designer other than you on the planet Earth that was more perfect for this project, because it literally well, it literally is about the two worlds, literally about two different worlds, and then of course being immigrants in America, and the partition, which is something I don't think a lot of Americans even knew about. And I found it interesting that we got a little taste of Bollywood in the Eternals, because Kumail Nanjiani at one point sets himself up playing his own ancestors all throughout the history of Indian cinema. And there's a Bollywood dance number in the middle of that, which I loved. But Miss Marvel, which we hear on the John Campea show, loved the show. You know, we did reviews of it, we after show reviews, and we just love this show. And I know that Marvel has a big visual design department. A lot of decisions are made because costumes were already defined in the comics. But tell us about, how did you come to work on Miss Marvel, and what was the experience like?
How did I find out about Miss Marvel? I feel like every South Asian person living knew that Miss Marvel was going to happen. It was one of those things that, has been in the pipeline for a while, and there was a lot of excitement about it even before filming. And it was one of those things that I just felt like, was my story to tell, and I wanted to be a part of it in any way that I could be. Mostly because I feel like, people throw around this idea of representation, and we want to be represented, of course, but also you want to be represented correctly, and I thought, I need to tell this. I need to be a part of this, because I feel like there is a certain simplicity and there's a certain joy to this character, and to the family, and to all the things that happen, that are very essential to be told correctly. It shouldn't be overblown or made out to be something it isn't. I wanted it to be honest. It was very exciting to me that it was a new character who needed to be created from the ground up, that there wasn't a costume floating, a superhero costume floating around that had already been made.
Right.
And we used sort of the template for the comic, but we brought into it lots of interesting details that we thought were special. We wanted to keep the footing of Ms. Marvel really light, and have it not be like a heavy story about, it was just about a young girl who was trying to find herself. A Muslim woman, Pakistani woman in the US, and how complicated that was, but also how easy it is, really, in a way. I wanted it to be simple, and loving, and I think we accomplished those things, and I think that's what people react to.
I think one of the great things about the show is the family, Kamala's family. You loved all of those characters. And I really liked, again, how you gave each one of those characters, you defined them by what they wore. And when we met the grandma or great grandma in Pakistan, she has that great line where she says, my passport is Pakistani, but my heart is Indian. And I really thought you did like the scene at the marriage, which turned into a Bollywood dance number. It's like you couldn't have done it without, you had to have a dance number somewhere. And it was so great, that scene at the wedding. I mean, I love the costume design there, and all. When you were designing that, were those costumes, especially the wedding costumes, were those based on traditional costumes, or were those an amalgamation, something you created, sort of a fusion?
Well, I think everything is based on something that exists for me, because it is part of my vocabulary and things that I've known and grown up with. But a lot of it, I mean, it's all created. It's all manufactured, like every film costume is. But there's the line that you mentioned before. The stories about partition, these are all things that I've grown up with, that we've all heard about. Every family has a partition story. Every family, every immigrant says something like that. My heart is here, but my passport is there, and my life is here. And you don't want to sound trite about it, but these are all issues that we deal with. And when I started working with Mira Nair, for instance, she always says, we have to tell our own stories, because if we don't tell them, then someone else is going to tell them incorrectly. And so that was the reason for me jumping into to Ms. Marvel, I really wanted to tell those stories in a way that seemed, and show the people to be real and like everyone, like people that we know, people that you know and I know, and in our families, or crazy stories of other people's families. I wanted it to feel real.
Oh, and you absolutely did. I mean, I think the extended family was one of the joys of that show, and I think it was really unexpected. You think, what is a Marvel superhero show? But the fact that there was such an emphasis on the family was, I thought, a breath of fresh air. Now, one of the things I also loved about it, and I think any fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe did, was her actual costume when she finally got the costume at the end. And, it was set up. She went to conventions and would cosplay. And it was such a great touch to have her mother say, look, I ordered this for you. I had it made for you. And I love that. But there was something that you brought a great quality. I heard there are cultural prints in the costume to reflect the heritage. How did that come about? I mean, did you work directly with the visual design team, but then did you get leeway to use the materials that you want to use? What went into the actual creation of that costume?
Yeah, all of the above. I mean, we definitely worked with them. They had very specific ideas of how they wanted to end, how they wanted the costume to be, and how similar they wanted it to be to the actual comics. Because again, Marvel is really about the fans, and it's about the people who've grown up with it and who want to get that finished product. But for me and the other people, the visual people on the team, it was trying to get to that. Like, how did that actually evolve, and how did we get to this costume? And so we did lots of sort of backwards working of how we could have got to that costume. And if anyone, I think, who followed the show really will be able to see that costume was like an evolutionary costume, that it started with one thing, and then there were additions that came on to the costume that were just pieces that she found or picked up or owned or added on to it, that eventually turned into the superhero costume that was at the end. The color blocking, the way it all came together, the jacket that was given to her by by the Red Daggers when she was in Pakistan, and before that the kurta that she bought in the market, and before that it was the pants that were left behind from the cosplay costume, and how they all like layered together to create the final costume, which is her costume as it exists in the comic, but also with certain changes. It was quite a tricky costume. It was the middle of pandemic. There were no big costume shops doing anything. Everything was closed. We made that costume in-house in Atlanta with some tailors. We screen printed the fabric ourselves. We dyed the fabric ourselves. We made the molds ourselves. It was all very like handmade and put together because everything was closed. The world was shut down. And it was a tough one. It's also one of the few Marvel superhero costumes that isn't a bodysuit. It's sort of a traditional garment which is trying to work as a superhero costume, and it has to move certain way, and it has all these restrictions that it has to do, and it has to be worn by stunt people, and it has to survive fires and fight sequences. And so it was tricky. It was something that I had to learn. I didn't know much about it, and I learned it through the process of making that costume. But it was also fun. It was very fun to make that costume.
What were some of the materials that went into in terms of fabrics that you used?
We used a lot of leather that had been laser cut. So it was laser cut leather that had been laid on top of other laser cut leather, and it was all sort of like glued together in a complicated way that I would never begin to understand. But I started to learn how to do it, and there were little pieces that we found. We had got these beautiful images of inscriptions on mosques that we had taken motifs off of, and we were trying to replicate those motifs, and create something that felt Islamic, but also felt modern, but also actually fed in eventually to the way the costume looks in the comics. So it was tricky. Yep.
Well, the final result was great. I mean, it's a terrific costume. Did you like working? You know, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has become such a behemoth in terms of its worldwide reach. Was it fun to work on these shows, or did you feel pressure because you have to deliver to such a big audience, and you're not just designing a costume for one TV show, you are designing a costume that might be used in movies for a long time to come. Did you feel any more pressure than you felt on any other job working for Marvel?
Yes, definitely. There's a lot of pressure, but also the payback is so great. You know, you to be able to reach that many people, and talk about cultural specificity and things that are important to me, to the you know on a platform that I wouldn't have been able to, without Marvel, is very important to me. And I thought that, I mean, that was a reason very much to do it. So yes, both. I mean, there's a lot of, you worry about being honest to the fans, and you worry about being honest to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but you also want to be honest to the heritage and culture. And you have to keep both things in mind. And yeah.
Well, I thought you knocked it out of the park. It was terrific. The show was amazing too. I didn't expect, I'm an old middle-aged man with one foot in the grave. I didn't expect to enjoy a show about a teenage girl as much as I did, but it was fantastic. And the family nature of it, and also finding out about the partition. I mean, this was a really difficult period of time in the creation of Pakistan and Indian history. It was not pleasant. And I think in a way, bringing that time to the West, there's a lot of people certainly in America that were unaware of that. And I think they did a really great job of presenting it fairly and providing perspective to both sides. And I didn't expect that from a superhero show from Disney either. So I think all of you who made that show did really an outstanding job. And it's an important series, I think, for people to understand, especially the last 70 or 80 years of history and where we're at now. It was great. You guys did a wonderful job. So thank you for that. Now, let me ask you, let me take you back. Also, a lot of people watch this show to get ideas about their own careers. And we have a lot of younger people watching, and they want to know, well, how can they get into this? Is there any advice that you can provide to people looking to get into costume design or film? I mean, obviously the landscape of film has been really changing over the last couple of decades, but is there words of wisdom you could give to people who are looking to get into this profession?
Gosh, makes me feel so old.
Sorry.
Words of wisdom. Listen, it's challenging, and there's a lot of work involved. And I love it so much, and I can't imagine doing anything else, because I don't think I'm good at anything else. But I also feel like if it's something that you love doing, and we've all heard our parents say this, and people say, if you love it, you should do what you love, because then every day will be a day that all of that stuff. But it's really true. I love cinema. I love working in costume. I love telling stories, and I'm here because it's what I love to do. But also find what makes you special and what makes you interesting, and use those things. You're never going to have anyone else's career. You're never going to be able to have anyone else's wisdom or anyone else's taste. You just have your taste. You have your ideas. You can bring to it specifically what your life is, and if you use all those things, that'll stand you in good stead. It stood me in really good stead.
Now, what about upcoming projects? What can we expect to see next from you?
I am currently working on another film with Marielle Heller. I'm in Los Angeles filming that with Amy Adams. So we're working on that now. And last year I did a film called The Boston Strangler, in which is obviously the Boston Strangler story, with my friend Keira Knightley, who I had worked with previously on Begin Again, and I haven't seen her in many years, and we did this film together, and I think that'll be a for all those crime buffs out there. It's going to be a good like true crime story.
I'm by the way, huge fan of Begin Again. I love that film. It's great. Now, what about social media? Can people follow you on social media? Are you on Instagram?
I am on Instagram, Arjun Bhasin Costume. I try to post as much as I can, which is once a month. No, I should post more. I will post more, but.
Well, now our viewers are gonna find you. Well, Arjun Bhasin, thank you so much for doing this episode of the Designing Hollywood show. It's been such a thrill to talk with you today. And I can't thank you enough for your time and for being here. And I can't wait to see the new movie you're doing, because I feel
so honored to be part of this. As costume designers, we never get a chance to work with other costume designers. It's a very lonely kind of moment where you just are by yourself. And so to be a part of a group of costume designers is very special to me.
Oh, well, it's great to have you, and Marilyn Vance and Martika Ibarra are producers and producers of the show. They do such a good job of getting us like the very best people. I sometimes feel I'm not worthy to be here to talk to you guys because there's so many people.
We're just workers. We just work.
Well, thanks for being here, and thanks to our guest costume designer, Arjun Bhasin. I'm trying to get that right, for being here on the Designing. Is that perfect? All right, I'm glad. This episode is sponsored by the Costume Rentals Corporation. And a special thank you to our founder and executive producer, Martika Ibarra and Company, and of course, the great and legendary Marilyn Vance, and of course, John Campea, for allowing this show to be on the John Campea channel. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in, and be sure and like and subscribe to this YouTube channel, and leave a comment down below and tell us more about what you learned, what you want to see on the Designing Hollywood podcast. I'm, of course, your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. You can follow me on Instagram at rmburnett, or you can find me on Twitter at BurnettRM, or at Post Geek Singularity on YouTube. Thanks very much, and we'll see you on the next episode.